They told me Waverly Hills Sanatorium was just a job, a paycheck, a place where the past lingered only in whispers, but they didn't tell me about the rules or what would happen if I broke them. Behind every door, something waits. In the tunnels, something moves. And at night, when the lights flicker, the dead remember you. I thought I was working for money. Now I'm fighting for my soul. Welcome to the shadows, dear friends. If you're new here, consider this your first step into our haunted family. And to all my regular viewers, you know who you are. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for walking with me through these dark and twisted halls of horror. Your support keeps this channel alive, even when the stories chill us to the bone. Tonight's tale is not just a story. It's an experience. So settle in, let the darkness wrap around you, and remember, you're never truly alone here. I never thought I'd end up here at the gates of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Most people in Louisville whispered the name with a mixture of fear and reverence. For decades, it had stood as a crumbling monument to death and despair, a tuberculosis hospital turned into a haunted landmark. Some said the halls were still filled with shadows of the lost, patients who never left. Others swore the staff back then had conducted experiments, things that weren't in any medical textbook. But I didn't come here for ghost stories. I came because I needed a job. For weeks, I had been scraping by, sleeping in my car, and hopping between part-time shifts that barely covered food. Then, by sheer chance, I found a listing online. A caretaker was needed at Waverly Hills. The listing promised steady pay, free housing, and meals. It almost sounded too good to be true. The only catch was that applicants had to work nights. I thought nothing of it. I was already used to long, lonely hours. When I showed up for the interview, the first thing that struck me was how massive the sanatorium loomed against the sky. Its Gothic structure looked more like a fortress than a hospital, the kind of place designed to swallow people whole. The parking lot was cracked with weeds, the iron gates rusted, and the air carried the faint smell of damp stone and mildew. Inside, the building was no better. The ceilings stretched high with peeling paint, and the long hallways echoed every footstep. The waiting room had dust-covered chairs and faded murals on the walls that depicted happy, healthy children. Their painted smiles seemed twisted in the dim light. That was when I met him. "Mr. Keller?" a voice called. I turned and saw a man in his 60s. He was tall, thin, with sunken cheeks and deep-set eyes that seemed to carry decades of exhaustion. His suit was pressed, but his skin had the pale, almost gray look of someone who spent far too much time in the dark. "Yes, sir," I said, extending my hand. He didn't shake it. Instead, he studied me with a sharp gaze before nodding. "Follow me." He led me through a series of hallways, explaining as we walked. "This building has history, but you need not concern yourself with that. Your job is simple. Watch the grounds, maintain order, and ensure nothing unusual happens." "Unusual?" I asked, half smiling. He didn't return the smile. "Yes, unusual. You'll understand soon enough." When we reached his office, he pulled open a drawer and handed me a folder. Inside were several typed pages, yellowed with age. The top sheet was titled "Rules for Night Staff." I frowned, flipping through them. There were more than I expected, and many made no sense at all. Rule number 1, always begin your shift by walking the 5th floor corridor. If any doors are open, close them immediately. Rule number 2, never look directly into room 502 after midnight. Rule number 3, if you hear a child laughing in the hallways, do not answer. Rule number 4, should you find the elevator on the 4th floor waiting for you with its doors open, do not step inside. Rule number 5, between 3 a.m. and 3:15 a.m., do not look out any windows facing the woods. Rule number 6, if you hear knocking from the drain pipes, knock back only once, never more. And the list continued, each rule stranger than the last. I looked up at the man. "Are these serious?" "Deadly serious," he said. "You'll be staying in the caretaker's quarters on the 2nd floor. You'll begin tonight." The way he said it made my skin prickle. Still, I nodded. After all, rules were rules. I had worked at warehouses and factories where strict guidelines weren't optional either. Maybe this was just their eccentric way of ensuring staff followed protocol. The quarters were small but livable. A bed, a desk, a single lamp. The window looked out onto the sprawling grounds where weeds choked the once groomed lawns. At dusk, as the sun disappeared, the building seemed to shift. The shadows grew longer, and the silence thickened into something oppressive. My first shift began at midnight. I carried a flashlight, though most of the hallways already had dim emergency bulbs glowing like dying embers. The place smelled of dust, old plaster, and something faintly metallic, like blood that had long since dried. I remembered rule number 1 and made my way to the fifth floor corridor. It was notorious even in local legends, a place where countless patients had supposedly ended their lives. The moment I stepped inside, I understood why. The air was heavy, colder than the rest of the building, and there was an unnatural silence that pressed against my ears. I walked slowly, scanning each door. My heart nearly stopped when I saw one cracked open. It was room 506. The handle was cold as ice when I touched it, and when I pushed it shut, a gust of stale air rushed past me as though the room had been holding its breath. For a second, I thought I heard a whisper, so soft I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Shaking it off, I continued down the hall. All the other doors were closed. When I returned to the second floor, I felt a strange unease settle in my stomach. The building didn't feel empty. It felt like something unseen was moving just beyond my vision, always staying a step behind. At 1:15 a.m., I sat in the caretaker's office, writing notes to pass the time. That was when I heard it. A laugh, high-pitched, giggling, the unmistakable sound of a child playing. My blood ran cold. Rule number 3, do not answer. The sound echoed faintly from the hallway outside. Light, quick footsteps padded against the tiles, circling closer. The laughter grew louder, playful, almost beckoning. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to call out, to ask if someone was there, but I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. Minutes passed. The laughter faded. The footsteps stopped. I sat there, frozen, until the silence swallowed everything again. When 2 a.m. came, I forced myself to patrol the fourth floor. The elevator dinged softly as I approached, and when the doors slid open, my breath caught. It was empty, waiting. The interior light flickered, bathing the space in a sickly yellow glow. Rule number 4, do not step inside. I stood there, heart hammering, staring into its open mouth. For a moment, I swore I saw something in the far corner, a shape hunched low, unmoving. Then the lights flickered again, and it was gone. The doors shut on their own with a soft hiss. By 3 a.m., I was a bundle of nerves. I remembered rule number 5 and forced myself to stay away from the windows. But temptation gnawed at me. The woods outside stretched deep and dark, their black silhouettes swaying in the wind. I wanted to know what they were hiding. When 3:10 struck, I couldn't resist. I crept toward the nearest window and pulled the curtain aside. At first, I saw nothing, just trees. Then, slowly, my eyes adjusted. There were figures in the woods, dozens of them. Pale, almost glowing under the moonlight. They stood in clusters, motionless, all facing the building. One of them raised an arm, and though I couldn't hear it, I knew it was pointing at me. I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The rules weren't jokes. They weren't just superstition. When 3:15 passed, I forced myself to breathe, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I wanted to run, to leave, but I remembered the man's words. This was my job now. At 4 a.m., I heard the knocking. It echoed through the pipes, slow and deliberate. 3 knocks. I hesitated, then remembered rule number 6. Knock back only once. My knuckles rapped against the pipe. The sound traveled into the darkness, and for a moment, silence followed. Then, from somewhere deep within the walls, I heard it. A single knock in return. The rest of the shift crawled by in suffocating tension. When dawn finally broke, I sat in my quarters, staring at the crumpled list of rules on the desk. My hands trembled. I had followed them all, but only barely. And one thought terrified me more than anything else. If this was just the first night, what awaited me in the nights to come? The morning after my first shift, I expected the man who had hired me, Mr. Grayson, as I later learned his name, to come check in. But he didn't. No one came. I woke around noon to sunlight bleeding weakly through the curtains of my quarters. The brightness didn't comfort me. If anything, it made the memory of the night feel more surreal, as though I had dreamed it all. The laughing child, the open elevator, the pale figures in the woods, they couldn't have been real. But then I noticed the list of rules still lying on my desk. I picked it up, my thumb tracing the brittle paper. I thought of the figures pointing at me, their eyes unseen but somehow burning into me from the woods. No dream could have left me with this cold knot in my stomach. By evening, I was restless. Sleep had been shallow, and the silence of the sanatorium during the day was oppressive in a different way. The place was too big, too empty, yet it seemed to hum faintly with a life of its own. Doors creaked randomly, dust motes swirled in the shafts of sunlight, and I kept feeling watched. When midnight approached, I braced myself. My second night on the job. This time, I started with the fifth floor corridor. The hall was colder than before, and as soon as I stepped inside, I felt a weight pressing on my chest. All the doors were shut, except one. Room 502. The door wasn't open this time. It was ajar, as though someone had left it that way deliberately. I remembered rule number 2. Never look directly into room 502 after midnight. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, pulling the door shut without glancing inside. But before it closed fully, a faint sound slipped through the gap. A woman sobbing. The sound was raw, broken, the kind of crying that hollowed out the soul. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to push the door wide, to see who was in there, to help. But I didn't. I shut it firmly and pressed my forehead against the cold wood, forcing myself to breathe. The sobbing cut off instantly, replaced by silence so thick it rang in my ears. I backed away, heart pounding. The rest of the fifth floor was mercifully uneventful, though I swore the shadows clung to the corners longer than they should, shifting when I wasn't looking. When I returned to the second floor, I tried to calm myself with a cup of stale coffee from the caretaker's kitchen. That was when I noticed something new. A note had been slipped under my door. It wasn't from Mr. Grayson. The paper was old, the ink faded, as though it had been written decades ago. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. They don't like the rules broken. Obey, or they'll take you. No signature. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. Someone or something was trying to warn me. At 1:30 a.m., I was patrolling the third floor when I heard the laughter again. The same childlike giggles bouncing through the corridor. I froze, clutching my flashlight tight. Rule number 3, do not answer. The sound grew closer, skipping, running, until it was right behind me. I shut my eyes and kept walking, my breath shallow. The laughter turned sharp, shrill, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. When I opened my eyes again, something was written on the dusty window to my left, a message traced by a small, unseen hand. Play with me. My heart stuttered. I kept walking, faster now, until I reached the stairwell. At 2:15 a.m. I approached the fourth floor elevator again. This time, the doors were already open before I arrived. The light inside flickered like a dying bulb, and a low hum vibrated through the air. Something was different tonight. There was a figure inside. A woman, dressed in what looked like a nurse's uniform from the 1930s. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped in front of her. Her skin was gray, her hair limp and matted. The rules didn't mention what to do if the elevator wasn't empty. I stood frozen at the threshold, unable to move. My flashlight beam quivered in my hand, and the nurse's head began to lift, slowly, like a puppet dragged upward by invisible strings. Her eyes were black, hollow sockets. I stumbled backward, and the elevator doors slammed shut with a metallic clang. The echo chased me down the hall. By 3 a.m., I was shaking. I avoided the windows, though the temptation gnawed at me worse than the night before. Curiosity whispered that the pale figures were still out there, waiting, watching. Maybe they had moved closer. Maybe they were already at the gates. But I didn't look. At 3:12, something scratched at the walls, long, dragging sounds like claws raking the plaster. I pressed my palms to my ears until the noise faded. By 4 a.m., the pipes began to knock again. This time it was different, 4 knocks in quick succession. The rules were clear. Knock back only once, never more. My throat was dry, but I obeyed, rapping the pipe a single time. The response came immediately. Not a knock this time, but a voice, whispering my name. Daniel? My knees went weak. No one here knew my name, not even Mr. Grayson. I backed away from the pipes, refusing to answer, refusing to give the thing what it wanted. The whisper echoed once more, then faded into silence. When dawn finally arrived, I was a wreck. My hands shook, and my shirt clung to me with sweat. But something else was waiting for me. Another note slipped under the door. The handwriting was the same shaky scrawl as before, but the message was shorter this time. They know you now. I sat on the bed, the note trembling between my fingers. My first night had been terrifying, but manageable. The second night was worse. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were the only thing standing between me and something unspeakable. And now, whatever haunted this place, it knew my name. By the third night, I was already questioning if the job was worth it. The pay promised was good, better than anything else I could find, but no amount of money seemed enough to justify what I was experiencing. Still, something inside me kept me from leaving. Maybe it was pride, maybe desperation, or maybe it was the strange, invisible pull of the building itself. Waverly Hills didn't just scare me, it fascinated me. It felt alive. That evening, before my shift began, I searched the caretaker's office for anything that could explain the rules. In the bottom drawer, behind stacks of dusty files, I found a bundle of yellowed reports tied with string, patient records. I flipped through them, my eyes scanning the faded ink. Most were tuberculosis cases. Names, dates, symptoms, deaths. So many deaths. Entire families wiped out. But a few reports stood out. They weren't about disease at all. They mentioned behavior, screaming in the halls at night, patients seen wandering where they shouldn't be, staff disappearing. And then there was one file that made my skin crawl. Patient, unknown, room 502. Notes, female, pregnant. Cause of death, suicide by hanging. Found at 12:01 a.m., no record of admittance. I shoved the papers back into the drawer, heart racing. The sobbing woman from the other night, was she the one from room 502? I didn't want to think about it. Midnight was approaching, and the rules waited for no one. The fifth floor corridor was first, as always. I walked its length slowly, flashlight steady, listening to every creak and groan of the old walls. All the doors were closed, even room 502. I almost breathed a sigh of relief when a sound froze me in place. Footsteps. Not mine. They echoed down the corridor, slow and heavy, approaching from the far end. I aimed my flashlight, but the beam hit nothing. The steps grew louder, closer, as though someone invisible was walking straight toward me. I remembered the rules. They didn't say anything about footsteps on the fifth floor. No guidance. My mouth went dry. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The steps reached the spot right in front of me, then stopped. I couldn't breathe. The air grew icy cold, my breath fogging in front of me. And then, as suddenly as they started, the footsteps moved away, retreating down the hall until silence swallowed them. I left the fifth floor as fast as I could without running. Back on the second floor, I found something waiting in my quarters. Another note. This one wasn't on old paper. It was on fresh white stationery. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, different from the shaky scrawl of the first two notes. It said only, "Don't trust him." I stared at the message, my mind racing. Don't trust who? Mr. Grayson? Someone else? Whoever had slipped the earlier warnings under my door clearly wasn't the same person. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. At 1:20 a.m., the laughter came again, but this time it wasn't one child. It was several, dozens, by the sound of it, giggling, running, playing tag in the dark hallways. I shut my eyes, gripping the rule sheet in my pocket like a talisman. Do not answer, do not engage. But as I walked, I caught glimpses in my peripheral vision. Small shadows darting across the corridor, little feet scurrying just out of reach of my flashlight. And then, fingers brushing against my hand. Cold, small, child-sized. I jerked my hand back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My chest heaved with panic. They were getting bolder. By 2 a.m., I dreaded the fourth floor elevator. I forced myself to patrol, knowing it was part of the job, part of the rules. Sure enough, the elevator doors slid open before I reached them. Inside, the same nurse stood waiting, her head bowed, her hands clasped. But this time, she spoke. "Daniel." My blood froze. The same voice I had heard through the pipes. Her head lifted slowly, the black sockets of her eyes staring into me. I stumbled back, muttering, "The rules, the rules." The elevator doors slammed shut before she could step out. At 3 a.m., I kept my distance from the windows, but something pressed against the glass anyway. A hand, pale, skeletal, dragging slowly across the pane from the outside. My stomach twisted. I knew the figures from the woods were closer now. They had reached the building. The rules had said not to look outside. They hadn't said anything about what would happen if something outside looked in. I pulled the curtain closed and forced myself to focus. Just 2 more hours. At 4 a.m., the pipes knocked again. 3 times. I obeyed, knocking back once. This time, there was no whisper, no voice, Instead, a sound drifted up from the walls. Screaming. Hundreds of voices, all shrieking in unison, echoing through the pipes as though the building itself was full of trapped souls. I dropped the flashlight, clapping my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my skull, vibrating through my bones. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. I stood in the silence, shaking, sweat dripping down my face. The rest of the shift dragged by in tormenting quiet. I collapsed onto my bed as dawn crept in, too tired to even question the new note. But when I woke later that afternoon, I realized something horrifying. Another note had been slipped under my door while I slept. It was in the neat handwriting again. You broke a rule. They're coming tonight. When I woke that afternoon, sunlight flooding through the dusty curtains, the warning note was still clenched in my hand. You broke a rule. They're coming tonight. My first thought was denial. I hadn't broken anything. I followed the instructions. I closed doors, avoided room 502, ignored the children, stayed out of the elevator, never looked outside during the forbidden time. But then I remembered the hand on the window, the shadows brushing against my fingers, the voices in the pipes. Maybe it wasn't about me failing. Maybe it was about them changing the rules. That thought stayed with me all day. I barely ate. I couldn't shake the dread that tonight would be different, that the fragile order of the first 3 nights had already collapsed. I thought about leaving, just walking out the gate and never coming back. But the idea felt impossible, as if the building itself wouldn't let me. By nightfall, the air was heavy and electric, like a storm was about to break. When midnight struck, I forced myself to begin the patrol. The 5th floor corridor was darker than usual, as though the bulbs had dimmed on their own. My footsteps echoed strangely, repeating back to me a fraction of a second too late. All the doors were closed except for one. Not 502 this time. 510. The door was wide open, gaping into a black void. I swallowed hard and stepped closer, careful not to look inside. My hand reached for the knob, but the second I touched it, something cold grabbed me from the other side. A hand. Thin fingers, clammy skin, nails biting into my wrist. I screamed and yanked back, slamming the door shut with all my strength. The force nearly tore my arm from its socket. The grip vanished the moment the door latched. My chest heaved. I backed away, never turning my back to the room until I reached the stairwell. The rules had said nothing about other doors. Back on the 2nd floor, a new note waited under my door. My heart sank as I unfolded it. This time, the shaky handwriting had returned. They changed the rules. Watch the walls. I stared at the words until they blurred. Change the rules? How was I supposed to survive if they kept moving the goalposts? At 1:10 a.m., the children came again. Their laughter was louder, sharper, echoing all around me. I ignored them, walking fast, refusing to meet their invisible eyes. But then one of them spoke. Daniel, why won't you play with us? I froze, my throat locked. They knew my name now, too. A shape darted across the hallway ahead. A small body, child-sized, pale and translucent. For a moment, it stopped under the flickering light, staring at me with hollow sockets where eyes should be. Then it vanished. I almost broke then, almost ran screaming from the building. But something deeper than fear kept me moving. The rules. As twisted as they were the only anchor I had left. At 2 a.m., I dreaded the 4th floor. The elevator was waiting again, doors open, the nurse inside. But tonight, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 others. Men. Their faces were blurred, as though smeared by smoke. They stared at me from the shadows of the elevator, unmoving. The nurse's head lifted, and she smiled. Her teeth were wrong, too sharp, too many. Come with us, she whispered. The doors slammed shut before I could collapse to my knees. I stumbled back to the stairwell, gasping for air. The rules had no answers for this. At 3 a.m., I avoided the windows like the plague. But it didn't matter. The glass rattled violently, as if dozens of fists were pounding against it from the outside. I covered my ears, rocking on my heels, trying to block it out. When the pounding stopped, I made the mistake of glancing up. The curtains had shifted, and through the sliver of exposed glass, a face stared back at me. Pale, grinning, its eyes rolled completely white. I screamed and yanked the curtain closed, my body shaking uncontrollably. When 4 a.m. came, I dreaded the pipes. Sure enough, the knock started. Not 3 this time. 5. Slow, deliberate. I froze. What was I supposed to do? Knock back once? Knock 5 times? Do nothing? I remembered the note. Watch the walls. My flashlight beam swept across the plaster. Faintly, almost invisible under the dust, something was scratched into the paint. One knock only. Always. I forced myself to follow the original rule, knocking once. The pipes groaned, rattled violently, and then silence. But then the wall itself began to bleed. A dark, thick liquid seeped from the cracks, running down the plaster in long, sticky lines. The smell hit me next. Rot, rust, blood. My stomach heaved, bile burning my throat. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet as the liquid spread across the floor in a widening pool. And then in the middle of it, words appeared. Formed out of the dark liquid, curling like handwriting. You won't last the week. The rest of the shift dragged on in paralyzing dread. Every sound, every shadow, every breath felt like it would be my last. When dawn finally arrived, I collapsed on the bed in my quarters, shaking, too exhausted to think. But when I woke that afternoon, a figure was standing at the foot of my bed. Not a ghost, not a shadow. Mr. Grayson. His face was pale, his eyes darker than I remembered. He held the list of rules in his hand. You've done well, he said quietly. Most don't make it this far. My voice cracked. What is this place? What are these rules? What do they want? He smiled faintly, but there was no kindness in it. You'll find out soon enough. The rules are not here to protect you, Daniel. They're here to keep them satisfied. And then he turned and walked out, leaving me trembling in the sheets, the list clutched in my shaking hands. That night was still hours away, but I already knew it would be worse than anything I'd faced before. I didn't sleep much after Mr. Grayson's visit. His words echoed in my mind like a curse. The rules are not here to protect you, Daniel. They're here to keep them satisfied. Them. The word hung in the air long after he left. Whoever they weren't just ghosts. They were something older, hungrier, and the rules weren't barriers. They were offerings. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, my nerves were shredded. Every shadow in the room seemed alive, every creak of the building a warning. I thought about running. I could pack my bag, slip out before dark, and take my chances with the road. But when I stepped toward the door, I froze. There was another note, already slipped underneath, the shaky handwriting again. Don't leave. If you try, they'll follow you. The message sent chills down my spine. Whoever was writing these notes, they were watching me, maybe even closer than I realized. By midnight, I forced myself onto the 5th floor. My flashlight beam cut across the long, endless corridor, and every door was closed. Relief washed over me for a moment, until I noticed the writing on the walls. Faint, chalky letters stretching the entire length of the corridor. At first, I couldn't read them, but as I walked, the words sharpened into focus. Open a door, any door. My heart thudded. The rules said to close doors, not open them. Was this another trick? Or was this part of the change Grayson had hinted at? Halfway down the corridor, I heard the footsteps again. Slow, heavy, echoing mine. They grew louder with every step I took. My throat tightened. Then behind me, a door creaked open on its own. Room 508. The darkness inside spilled out like smoke. The footsteps stopped. The silence was suffocating. I turned back to the door, hand trembling on the knob. Every instinct screamed at me to close it, but the writing on the wall burned in my mind. Open a door. I pushed it wider. The air shifted, cold and sharp, like I had just opened the door to a freezer. My flashlight flickered, struggling against the blackness. Something moved inside the room. Not a person, not exactly. It was tall, thin, its limbs too long, joints bent at wrong angles. Its skin clung tightly to its bones, stretched pale and translucent. But it wasn't its body that froze me. It was the face. It didn't have one. Just smooth, blank skin where features should have been. The thing tilted its head toward me as if curious. My hand shot out and slammed the door shut. The entire corridor shook with a deep, guttural groan, like the building itself was angry. I bolted down the stairs, heart hammering. At 1:15 a.m., the children returned. Their laughter was shrill, furious, nothing playful about it now. The sound circled me, darting through the halls like they were hunting. I clutched the rule sheet, whispering to myself, "Don't answer! Don't answer!" But then a voice rose above the laughter, a child's scream, high-pitched, desperate, begging. "Help me! Please help!" My chest tightened. It wasn't laughter this time. It was crying, the kind of cry no human could ignore. Tears welled in my eyes. Every part of me wanted to run toward the sound, to help, to save. But I stayed rooted, shaking because deep down I knew it wasn't a child. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it began, and the laughter returned, louder than ever. By 2 a.m., I dreaded the elevator more than anything else. The doors were open again, waiting. The nurse was gone this time, but the 3 shadow men were still inside. They stood side by side, staring at me with their blurred faces. Then, slowly, one of them stepped out. I stumbled back, flashlight trembling. The figure walked stiffly, each step leaving a faint burn mark on the floor, like its very presence scorched the tiles. It stopped just inches away. I couldn't see a face, only darkness where its features should have been. The elevator doors slammed shut behind it, trapping me alone with the thing. I ran. Its footsteps followed, slow but relentless, echoing down the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell and slammed the door shut. The footsteps stopped on the other side, but I knew it was still there, waiting. At 3 a.m., the windows shook violently. The glass warped and bent as though something was pressing against it from outside. I didn't dare look, but I could hear them now, the pale figures from the woods, whispering. Dozens of voices, all murmuring at once. Low, guttural chants in a language I couldn't understand. The sound drilled into my skull, making me want to claw my ears out. I curled against the wall, hands pressed to my head, whispering over and over, "It's not real. It's not real." But it was real. The glass cracked. Long, jagged lines splintered across the windows. Just before they shattered, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was worse. At 4 a.m., the pipes began to knock. This time it wasn't 3. It wasn't 5. It was endless. Knock after knock, slamming through the walls, shaking the building. I covered my ears, screaming, but the noise only grew louder. The pipes rattled violently, bursting in places, spraying water across the floor. And beneath the sound of knocking, I heard voices again. Not whispers, not screams, chanting. The same guttural words the figures outside had spoken. I staggered back to my quarters, drenched and shaking, clutching the rule sheet like it could save me. When I reached my room, a note was waiting on the bed. Fresh paper, neat handwriting. Grayson is lying to you. The rules are a ritual. Each night you survive, you feed them. My stomach dropped. I sat there trembling, staring at the words until the letters blurred. If the rules weren't for protection, if they were sacrifices, then every night I obeyed, I was giving them something. And sooner or later, they'd want more than rules. I did not sleep the night after the 5th day. Sleep would not come, not after what I had seen and what I had learned. Every breath I took inside the walls of Waverly Hills felt borrowed, stolen from a place that wanted it back. My hands trembled, and yet I kept forcing myself to stay awake. The silence of the building was deceptive. It always was. Beneath the stillness there was a pulse, a low humming vibration that ran through the walls, the pipes, the floorboards. The sanatorium itself was alive, and I was just another shadow crawling inside it. Rule 6, I kept telling myself, was the last one. I had survived the others somehow. But what would the final rule demand? And more importantly, what would happen if I broke it? The list of rules haunted me more than the screams in the hallways. They were written as though someone before me had lived through the same torment, someone who had been desperate enough to leave behind a guide for the next victim. And yet, no name, no signature, just the cold, rigid handwriting, each rule carefully carved into paper that seemed far older than me. At 3 a.m., when the air grew sharp and the hallway shifted into something unrecognizable, I heard the old nurse's voice again. It was distant at first, like a memory floating through fog. "You shouldn't be here, child. You should have left when you had the chance." I froze. I was sitting at the security desk, the single lamp flickering above me. My heart thudded painfully, my eyes darting to the shadowed corridor where the sound had come from. But she wasn't there. Instead, the elevator doors creaked open by themselves, spilling faint greenish light into the hall. The smell of rust and old blood drifted out. And though I told myself not to move, my body betrayed me. I rose from the chair and walked, step by step, toward that open mouth of steel. Inside, the air was colder than death. The bulb inside the elevator swayed slightly as if disturbed by something unseen. My reflection in the mirrored back wall didn't match me. I stood there staring, but the figure in the glass was grinning. "Rule 6, it whispered. My chest tightened. I hadn't yet read the 6th rule. The notebook was still in my pocket, and my hands shook as I pulled it out. My reflection moved ahead of me, quicker, as if it were impatient. I flipped the brittle pages, past rules 1 through 5, and there it was. Rule 6. It read, "When the elevator calls, you must ride it, but do not look at the other passengers, not even once." The paper nearly slipped from my hand. The elevator door chimed softly, waiting, and deep inside my gut, I knew this was the end of my trial. I stepped inside. The doors closed behind me with a sound like a coffin sealing shut. The numbers above the door flickered, shifting between floors that should not exist. Basement, 6th, 3rd, 10th, then something unreadable, like symbols carved in a language older than time. The light buzzed overhead. My reflection no longer grinned, but its eyes tracked me with something like hunger. I pressed myself into the corner, gripping the rusted railing, and whispered the rule under my breath. Do not look at the other passengers. The elevator groaned as it moved. Then, with a faint thud, it stopped. The doors slid open. I kept my eyes down. Something stepped inside. The air grew foul, thick with rot. My nostrils flared, and I almost gagged. The floor shuddered beneath the weight of whatever had joined me. The doors closed. The elevator descended. A wet sound followed, like flesh dragging across steel. My body stiffened, but I forced my gaze to stay fixed on the corner. I could feel it beside me, breathing. The air burned my throat. Another stop. Another figure stepped in. I heard the scrape of long nails against the wall. Then a whisper, too close to my ear. "You're not supposed to be here." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood, but I didn't look. The rule echoed in my head like a chant. Don't look, don't look, don't look. The elevator kept moving, stopping. More weight pressed the floor as others climbed in. My skin crawled as the space around me filled, shoulder to shoulder, though nothing touched me. Whispers slithered through the air. Some were prayers, some were screams. And one, a voice that sounded just like mine, whispered, "You'll never leave." The light flickered. The elevator was full now, packed with bodies I could not see. My lungs strained with the stench of decay and something else, something sweet like spoiled fruit. Finally, the elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors creaked open. Cold wind rushed in, carrying with it a sound I'll never forget. The faint moans of hundreds of voices crying all at once. The rules had said to ride it. I had. The rules had said not to look at them. I hadn't. But the rules had not told me what to do once the doors opened. I hesitated, and in that hesitation something shifted. One of them spoke again, its voice sharp as broken glass. "You saw us, didn't you?" My body went numb. The words were accusation, not question. I kept my head down, trembling. No, didn't. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. For a long moment I thought they might tear me apart right there. But then, one by one, I felt the weight of them step out. The air lightened. The stench faded, replaced by the sterile chill of the sanatorium. When the last of them left, I finally dared to lift my head. The elevator was empty. My reflection stared back at me, pale and exhausted, no longer grinning. I stepped out. The hallway before me was not one I recognized. It stretched impossibly long, lined with doors that pulsed faintly like beating hearts. At the far end, a single figure stood, the nurse. The same one who had warned me. Her face was kinder now, almost sad. She lifted a hand, gesturing for me to come closer. My feet carried me forward, even as the walls seemed to breathe around me. When I reached her, she spoke softly. "You followed the rules. Few ever do. What happens now?" My voice cracked. She looked past me, her eyes heavy with sorrow. "Now you leave, and you never return. This place has claimed enough of you already." Before I could respond, the hallway bent and folded like paper. The doors vanished, the walls twisted, and suddenly I was outside, standing on the cracked pavement of the sanatorium's entrance. The morning sun was rising. Birds sang in the distance. For the first time in days, the air smelled clean. The building loomed behind me, silent, its windows like watching eyes. I stumbled to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. When I looked back one final time, the nurse was at the window watching me. She raised her hand in farewell. Then she was gone. I drove away without looking back again. But the rules are still with me, burned into my memory, written in that notebook I can never seem to get rid of, no matter how many times I try. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the elevator chime. It waits. And I know, deep down, that Waverly Hills isn't finished with me. Not yet. Thank you for walking through the darkness with me tonight. Your presence keeps these stories alive. If you felt the chill, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Until we meet again in the shadows.